Podcasts.
The Profile. You're listening to Premier Christian Radio.
Well, hello and welcome to The Profile. This show is sponsored by Premier Christianity magazine. That's the magazine that I help put together each month. If you would like a free sample copy of the very latest issue, we would be delighted to send you one. Simply go to premierchristianity.com/free sample, type your details in, we'll send you one free copy of the latest issue of the magazine. Lots of interviews, features, news and reviews for you to check out. But today, here on the show, I'm really pleased to say I am joined by Pastor Doug Williams. Doug is the pastor of Emmanuel Christian Centre in the East End of London. He also speaks regularly at conferences in the UK, including Mission Worship and Kingdom Worship Movements The Renewal, plus internationally all over the world speaking. And as well as being a pastor and a teacher, Doug is also a musician and a worship leader. He's married to Joan and they have 4 children. Doug, welcome to the programme.
Hey, thanks, Sam.
It's great to have you with us. And we always start on the show by going right back to the beginning and asking about a person's early life. So tell us something about you growing up.
Oh, it's an interesting story, Sam, because it's full of ups and downs for me. My family, as I look back over my shoulder, it's a bit like a train wreck, really. My dad had 3 wives, a wife in Nigeria, a wife in Sierra Leone, and my mum and me in London. She discovered this, and as a result of that, she broke away from the relationship and decided that she would move on to try and get our life set up in either the US or Canada. And while she was doing that, I was in foster care here in the UK and eventually ended up in a children's home. So a lot of my early years were in institutional care. And there's all kinds of stories with that. I mean, I got to tell you, the lady who looked after me as a kid, a lady by the name of Mrs. Frost, an English lady. For those who are listening in the radio, can't see I'm a black guy. Maybe you didn't tell me, Sam. But this lady took me into her family, and I got to tell you, to me, she was the real queen of England. She was a fantastic lady, yeah, and looked after us as kids and brought us up. We had our challenges, you know, the issue of being a minority figure in colour-wise, in terms of ethnicity in the area, had all kinds of problems for me. I was in all kinds of scrapes and fights and problems, and eventually I ended up at this children's home, stayed there for 10 years until an amazing thing happened to me towards the end of my stay there, because a member of staff who was there was a Christian. I mean, everybody thought he was a bit of a religious nut. There was talk amongst the staff about this religious guy who was coming in. But he shared his faith, and ultimately I made a commitment to Christ because of his story and his testimony. Wow. So that's some of my early life and how it was lived out for me.
I mean, that must have been so hard, not just growing up, but I guess since then in dealing with that kind of a background. That's a very complicated background.
Well, you know, to be honest, you've mentioned that I'm pastoring a church now. It's not. We've changed the name, actually. You've done some research on me, and we were Emmanuel Christian Centre. We're now Emmanuel Community Church, because the centre idea kind of spoke to the building, and we're going, you know, we're a community of people, we want to focus on that. And because we're a community of people are my focus. I'm always trying to make the people work more important than the paperwork. And so when you're dealing with people, there is never a straight line with people's lives. It is complicated. And so in many ways, the complex layers of my own experience have been hugely beneficial in trying to relate to the people that God's put in my view for care. So, yeah, I mean, I walked through my story of my mum and her, you know, being away from her family, being away from me. When she was in America, she went through racial abuse and she was attacked, and she spent 7 years in a wheelchair because of her injuries. I asked her, you know, when I met her, how she survived all of this stuff, and she said, because of me. She said, I knew somewhere out there was a little boy that would call me Mum. Wow. And she said that was the motivation to get well. So those were the kind of experiences. Ultimately, my mum went through acute depression as a result of the things that she'd experienced, as broken relationships and the whole damage that happened to her life. And she unfortunately took her life before we were able to really, really connect as son and mother. But so I had those things in my experience, and I talked to people about them quite openly, quite candidly, because, you know, to deny that is to deny her story, and to deny her story is to deny part of mine. So I think it's great to be honest and upfront about these things and talk about it. And it's just helped people. It's just helped people tremendously to have a pastor that's not afraid to be that transparent.
Do you think that speaks to something in the wider church, something you want to share with the wider church in terms of being open as a pastor? Because I guess plenty of pastors feel like they can't show even signs of weakness or signs of difficulty because they're in a position of leadership.
I understand that, but then here we've got Paul as an apostle and a leader who says, "I will actually glory in my weakness. I'm not afraid of my vulnerabilities, proclivities, or limitations, because that's the reality of who I am. So I'm not going to deny reality. I'm not asking for pastors to get into the pulpit and wear their heart on their sleeve and look like they're a ragged, unraveled mess. Do you know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, I'm talking about things which are real to me, but I'm also talking about a Saviour who's walked with me through all of those things. And so I think if people can see you as a leader with your limitations and weaknesses, but have seen the grace of God working in that, it kind of gives them hope for their own stuff, you know? And so that's why I do it. I go, this is what happened to me. I'm as regular as anybody else here. You know, I'm called pastor. It's just my job. I got a call from God to do this. You got a call from God to do what you're doing. And this is how he's worked with me and is working through me. And it just seems to resonate with people,
So take me back to that moment where you heard the gospel for the first time. Tell me more about what happened next after.
Oh, well, it was interesting because this member of staff, his name was Harry Horsfield. He was an ex-policeman.
So this is in the
children's home. Yeah, he came to
home.
work in the children's home, and I was watching this guy, and you know, he was just a nice guy, just a pleasant person. I kept wondering what he was going to look like. I thought he was going to walk in sort of 6 foot off the ground and with a halo, because the way people talked about him, he's so religious and so weird. And so I'm kind of intrigued at what this guy is about. I mean, I used to go to church, so I was kind of interested to listen. I used to go to the Anglican church and sing in the choir. But when I was at the children's home, I did that with my foster parents. And when I was at the children's home, and was continuing to do that, I got kicked out of the church because I was in the choir and I was, you know, mucking about as normal. I was just constantly, you know, a jokey guy telling jokes, mucking. I never disciplined in that regard. And the choir director got upset, and he said something about me and something about children who come from the kind of children's home that I was in, which I saw red. I mean, I'm like, how dare you say that? So I jumped over the choir stool where we were, grabbed the guy and smacked him in the face, knocked him on the ground. And so here I am, getting wrestled with this guy. And
in the middle of church?
In the middle of the church choir rehearsal. And then they dragged me off, and that was my last visit to the Anglican church for a long time. So I never went to church. But so I'm interested, though, when this guy shows up at the children's home and starts talking about Christianity in a way that was kind of refreshing, because it just seemed like it was part of his everyday life and it was real to him. And one thing tipped it for me, though. We have these chores in the children's home that we have to do every week. And one of them was there were these huge, giant-sized dustbins that have to be taken out. And it's a dirty, smelly job. But everything has to be done. You have to do your chores. I hadn't done mine. I took it up, I think, in the morning. And then it was on a sort of a pathway that it has to be brought back at night. And I'd left mine there. And I came home from school thinking, I don't want to do this chore. I'm done with this. And so I got it, and I got into trouble with one of the female members of staff who was berating me and saying, you need to go and get this done. You know, you've got responsibilities like everybody else. And I said, I'm not doing that. And I got into a bit of an altercation with her. So he came into the room and he goes, what do you think you're doing? You know, and he started raising his voice and said, you need to get the job done, son. You need to do this right. And I thought, oh, so here you are, Mr. Christian. You're just like the rest of them, right? So I went slamming out the back door. And unknown to me, he went out the front door. And we met on the pathway up to this dirty dustbin. It's a huge, big thing, taller than me. And he took one side and I took the other, and we walked it back to where it should go without saying a word. But in all of the years that I'd been in that children's home, not one member of staff had ever done that. And it was a simple gesture, but it just stuck in my head.
Wow.
Like, why would he do that? Why would somebody do that? I don't know why that was so significant for me, but it was. And it meant that when he next began to talk about his testimony or chat with the kids about his faith, I was all ears. Until one day he had some literature that he was giving out and said, you know, if you're interested in reading this, or you guys have been asking me questions, here's something to read. I took that, and it was a leaflet by the late Selwyn Hughes. And I took it and I read it, and by the end of the day, I was convinced that I needed to give my heart to Christ. You know, there were a few things going off in my life anyway that had stirred me.
And what age were you then?
I was 18.
18 years old.
I was hanging out with my friends, and we'd go out, and so sometimes the children's home didn't quite know where I am. So if any of the members of staff who've now retired are hearing this message, hearing this radio, there were some weekends when they thought I was someplace, I was somewhere else. But I remember one of those weekends because I was helping a friend come down from a drug trip, and I'm trying to keep an eye on this guy to keep him safe. And we were out. It was out in the morning, like 4:00 in the morning. I'm out in the high street, and I saw this guy stumbling home, a wreck, you know, drunk, vomiting over himself, urinating over his trousers, and he was crawling along a wall. And I watched this guy. I'm sitting there smoking, and I watched this guy. And honestly, Sam, there's like a voice spoke in my ear. It made me frightened. I was shaking. And the voice said, if you don't stop, that's your future. If you don't stop, that's your future. And I was shaken. I was like, what did I hear? I mean, I froze to that spot. And so when this guy, Harry, at the children was starting to talk about, his lifestyle and how he changed, that kept rolling around in my mind. So it wasn't so long after reading that literature and these kind of experiences that I thought, it's time to give my heart to Christ, and that's what I did.
Amazing. So having become a Christian, what was the next step for you?
Well, eventually to go to church. Not straight away, because, I asked Harry, he was going to a little Baptist church in town. I said, can I come? He said, not yet, just read the Bible. And, And so I read the Bible for a good few weeks without going to church until I believed everything, the concordance, the maps, the content page. I'll just believe all of it, which was good because not everybody in my church kind of believed the Bible the way I did in terms of, real experience. But eventually I ended up going to the church. My friends thought it was crazy because, I don't really have proper church clothes. Most of my clothes was for nightclubs or discos. So they're like, you can't go to church like that. But I did. I went in and, the people accepted me. They loved me. It was very warm. When I walked in, I think the youth group began because before I got there, everybody in the youth group was over 58 years old. And I'm not lying, I'm not trying to be ageist, but there were times when in the prayer meeting, I'm the only guy with my own hips, you know what I'm saying? So the deal is, it was a challenge, but the reason why I stayed was because they just loved me. Yeah. And they gave me an opportunity to be involved in ministry. Now, that wasn't because I'm super gifted or something. Basically, if you had a warm body and a pulse, you qualify in that little church. So that's what happened to me.
You were young, I'm sure.
And I was young, and I enjoyed it.
There
were other people coming to it. So we got some great things with the kids and the youth in that little Baptist church. I got some very fond memories of those days.
Wow. At what point did you feel like you were called to be a pastor? At what point did that kind of ministry come forward?
After doing the children's ministry for a couple of months, I remember walking home late one night after a session with these kids. And I can tell you where I stopped. I could take you to the spot in the road. And I held my Bible to my chest in the middle of the night when nobody was around me. And I said, God, I so enjoy what I'm doing with these kids, speaking your word to them and sharing. I really love this. And if you want me to do this for the rest of my life, I will. I'm serious. And I think that was the moment I said yes to ministry,
Amazing.
Yeah.
So you went to Spurgeon's College, I believe.
I did.
To train. What was that like?
Spurgeon's College was great. Really interesting people. And for me, coming from... I guess I stumbled into Christianity in terms of Pentecostal stuff. Because I was just on the back of a bus one day praying for my friends. And I began to speak fluently in a language that I'd never learned.
Wow.
And I don't know what the theology of the people listening to this broadcast is, but that's the reality of my experience. I tried to tell my pastor, he said, well, that doesn't happen today. I said, well, it did happen today. He said, no, what I mean is it doesn't happen anymore. So I had a kind of conflict for a few days until I theologically think I came to the place where, I was happy to accept what had happened to me. I spoke to some of the Pentecostal believers in a village next to mine, and that pastor was incredibly helpful. And so I'm enjoying that, and I'm enjoying, God using my testimony. I'm sharing my story around the area and all those kind of things. But, underneath it, you always feel you want to go deeper. I lived with a Baptist pastor for a number of years. And he stirred me. Every Saturday I'd sit for a couple of hours in his office while he's preparing. I didn't know that he was kind of training or mentoring me, but he was saying, this is how I do my stuff. And I loved his thoughts, and I loved his background. He would say some things, and he'd go, oh, yeah, and this is the history to that, and this is the theological context or the geographical context for these stories. And I thought, man, this builds such a rich picture and such a 3D understanding in my head of the text. At one point, I definitely will have to go to study in the Bible school. So I came to London. I did 2 years in a very small charismatic Bible school with Elmer and Jean Darnell called Christian Life College. And that was great. It was great for heart and passion and evangelism. But when I wanted to go a little deeper in terms of my understanding of theology, that's when I showed up at Spurgeon's. And I think the backdrop to it is, it's not that I go out every day now and try and tell people what I know theologically. But you can tell if somebody prepares 2 plates of food for you, you'll know the Michelin chef and you know the guy who, learned from his grandma. There's a difference.
Yes.
And so I said to myself, well, I'm not sure that I want to go out and tell everybody this is what I know, this is how smart I am, this is how what you learn when you go to Bible school. But it just gave me the confidence to speak about things, and I think it's important that you come across when you're preaching with that level of confidence. So that's what Spurgeon's did for me. I love being with the people, love getting exposed to all that kind of stuff. It was a great time.
Fantastic. So did leading a church come quite soon after that?
Well, when I went to Spurgeon's, I was already leading the church. I've been applying to church when we were 27. I was working with a group called New Life Assembly in Dulwich, a guy called Lovell Bent, and a man who was probably known to Premier and the Evangelical Alliance called Philip Moabir. Philip was a great guy. He started the African Caribbean Evangelical Alliance, and I worked with him as the kind of secretary admin guy in the office. So those guys were great mentoring influences to me as big brothers and father figures. And so I was already leading a small congregation in East Dulwich when I went to Spurgeon's, which made it for me more strategic, because there were people in the class, I think, who were thinking, this stuff I'm learning today, do I need to know this? Is it going to be the exam? Whereas for me, it was tomorrow
really
night stuff.
Yeah,
I was like, great, I could see exactly how to utilize this material. And so that's when I was already involved in ministry when I got there.
Incredible. And you were being given opportunities, you say, from a very, very young age. Is there something that you think was in the hearts of the leaders putting you forward there, who recognised something in you from an early age, was giving you those opportunities? Yeah,
I think they did. I think they realised that one of the things was they felt that I could communicate well, that somehow people listen. And I'll tell you what happened. When I came from where I was staying with my foster parents to the children's home, fitting into something like that is always a little difficult, to find your space and find the pecking order where you are. What I discovered is everybody likes to laugh. And so at the children's home, I would sit at the children's home and we would spend those evenings when we had nothing to do, sharing jokes and stories and funny things. So when I went to my primary school, I'd sit in the playground and tell kids stories. I had crowds of kids around me. The teachers came over and said, "What are you telling these kids?" In fact, they recorded me telling jokes so they could play it in the staff room. Wow. So I had all of these jokes and, the timing of it all, the punchline of it. And I was just a kid, but I'm learning how to do this. And I think, unknown to me, I was learning how to communicate. So when I got saved, I kind of still had a little bit of that, a way to connect with people on me. So the pastors I knew and the Christian leaders that I knew were often trying to get me into a position where they're going, I think there's potential with this young guy. Yeah. Let's see what we can do. I mean, I showed up at meetings with Philip Moabir that I probably shouldn't have been in. And I just sit in the corner and then he would go, "So what do you think?" On the way home, we're driving home now. I hadn't said anything throughout the whole meeting because they're all big guys, They're all like, they're looking at him going, "And so who's this guy?" And he goes, "Oh, that's my son." They're going, "Oh, okay." Nobody argued with Philip. So I'm sitting there thinking, I don't think I should even be here. But I'm listening. Yeah. And so on the way home, we go, "So what would you have said to this? Or what would you think about that?" Right. And so it was a kind of a dry run for me to have a go at what my contribution could be in a context like that. I didn't know how significant that would be. But it proved to be hugely significant. It sounds like there was a real culture of mentoring and discipleship in your 20s. Yeah, I think that was right. I had a number of good people around me who did that. Many people remark that today, in lots of churches actually, that there isn't so much of that culture. Mentoring in some churches, you have to really seek it. You have to seek it out for yourself. It's not something necessarily that leadership can put in place for you. Is this something that's missing? I think it is. I think I wrote a whole thesis on the role of mentoring in the development of Christian leaders. I think without it, we're the poorer. There were just some things which I learned life to life, and some things that I saw, in somebody's way of doing things and how they handled a crisis situation, how they were in counselling. I don't know how you can actually distill that down to an essay or some kind of book. No. You just watched it and you think, okay, that's how that works. And without being close enough, without that level of proximity to somebody, you just don't see it. You don't get exposed to it. So we're trying to be intentional about that in our own church and try to make sure that whatever level we are, we're trying to put our arms around people and walk a journey with people to help them do it. And they actually grow quicker and more securely when you do. Yeah. So tell me more about the church. I say you've been there over 20 years now. Yeah, I got there in 97, as an assistant pastor. I was working with a man by the name of Andrew Coltart, who's still a dear friend of mine. And in 2000 took over the senior leadership role. And so, any mistakes in the church now are all mine. It's my fault. So nowhere to hide. Yeah, nowhere to hide. But no, it was a great church. It's there in East London. And we now have we had 2 English-speaking congregations because we'd had one in a school and one in our old building. We put them all back together. We have a small Tamil fellowship as well and a French Congolese-speaking congregation. So good several hundred people who are in that church now. And it's multicultural and it's mixed across the generations and the ages. There were a number, I think it was about 5 of us as pastors, maybe 6 who are pastors in the church now. We're part of the Assemblies of God denomination, although our links are way beyond the Assemblies of God. Our friendships go beyond that too. We're kingdom people, really. So that's where we are in the East End of London, trying to be as relevant as we can.
And I guess that diversity in who you've got in the church, is that fairly representative of the actual local community and the culture you're in terms of East End of London, there being lots of different people with different backgrounds, and you want to incorporate that into church life as well?
I think that is. And it's a challenge to do it, to try and understand people and bring them all together. But we are trying to do that. So we are, if you come into our church, you'd see it's very multiracial. We mix black and white people. But if you look at the black people, they're not all the same. We've got Africans, you've got Caribbeans, we've got people from Asia, the Tamil Fellowship, from the Sri Lankan culture, the French Congolese people, etc., etc. So people from Nigeria, people from Ghana, and that kind of thing. So it's a great blend.
Well, what are some of the practical, I guess, difficulties that you may run into as a pastor of a church with a diverse and a mixed congregation that those that are more monocultural wouldn't have experienced?
Yeah, I think it's the challenge for people having to deal with those who are not like them and walking people through the journey. I'm sure for a lot of the white people in our church, they probably look around over the years they've been there and gone, I've actually changed church, but I didn't leave the building. So it's kind of a weird feeling, because the culture of the church, the feel of it, the vibe of it as people come in. So you have to keep talking to one another. And most of that learning is not done in a church service. We can have all our platform reconciliation meetings and bridging the gap, in terms of ethnicity and culture type stuff. But actually it's when people get into one another's homes or share life together, they have a meal together, they talk about stuff. That's when it really works. I mean, I went to one guy's house when I first got to the church, an English guy called Peter. And my family went for lunch. They invited us, lovely couple. And so while I'm there, he says, Pastor, you probably want some hot, spicy sauce with your dinner. I know you folks kind of like that. I said, oh, wow. I said, do you know something? I wouldn't expect you to have stocked this in your house and you'd like that stuff. He said, oh, me? No, I can't touch it. It's too hot for me. I said, so why'd you got it? And he said, well, because when people come to my house who have a different culture to me, they might do that. So I'm trying to accommodate people. And I thought, hey, Pete, you got it. This is what I want to hear. That we are just trying to make space for one another. We're trying to understand one another. It takes a little bit of time. Yeah. And takes getting used to. Yes. I remember one time a guy came to our church and he'd come for the service. And it's a bit of a rough time in East End boy. And he was at the top of the stairs looking down, and an African lady came up in one of these flowing gowns, beautiful outfit, really regal. And she came up, it was red and white, and she came up, and he looked down the stairs and he goes, up the Gunners! And so she's looking at me like, Gunners? What's the Gunners? So it's just... yeah, trying to understand how people are. She's like, what's that? I said, no, that's his favourite football team. And it's just all of that stuff. So as long as, nobody's too self-absorbed. Sure. We're willing to get over ourselves and talk and learn. And also, if we can create a context where it's okay to make mistakes. Yeah. So I get it wrong. I make a mistake about what I've said about somebody's culture or age or whatever. Yeah. And I go, okay, well, let's just turn this into a classroom. We don't have to have a war here. Yeah. We can talk this through. This is why this is sensitive. This is why this is painful.
Because I guess no one likes to be stereotyped, and I can imagine another person reacting quite differently to the hot sauce example of saying, oh, actually, I may look this way, but actually, no, I don't like spicy food. And why would you make that kind of judgment? Yeah. I mean, this is a minefield, right?
It really is, and that's why we're saying everybody just calm down. Yeah. Just take a chill pill. Don't get silly with each other. We're trying to be kingdom people here. We're trying to make sure that we understand around the throne of God there's every nation, tribe and tongue. If God's happy with it, hey, you should try with that, what he's happy with, and try to learn to live that way. And you're going to be enriched by it. Yeah. I like the tapestry of all of these cultures and colours. Yeah. I feel my life is definitely better for it.
Yeah, I think though, we need to have this conversation, particularly about race in the church. I mean, I always give the example. A couple of years ago, I went to the Excel Centre for what must be the UK's biggest all-night prayer meeting. Yeah. Tens of thousands of Christians packed into the Excel praying all night. Now, I as a white Christian, I go to New Wine, I go to Spring Harvest. I didn't even know this event existed, if I'm being completely honest. And I think most white Christians wouldn't know that it's a black majority event in the Excel Centre, tens of thousands of people
within church.
Yeah, exactly. Redeem
and they will probably say that the Excel meeting is a small prayer meeting. Right. Because I went to one of theirs in Nigeria. It was absolutely phenomenal. I have never been in a prayer meeting anywhere on the planet that was like the one I went to outside of Lagos in their campground. It was just a very outstanding time of people seeking God. Yeah.
It's called the Festival of Life.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that's a kind of small example of where I, as a white Christian living in the UK, am disconnected in many ways from what is happening in another part of the church, and there seems to be this divide along racial lines.
Yeah, but now, I'm going to say that, Sam, you're not at fault in that, because I think sometimes even our churches of colour haven't connected. So I would want to see that those who are coming over from Africa or from Asia or from South America are not sort of getting locked into their little museums of the sort of diaspora of their own culture and can't relate. So, I don't want to go into a church that's mainly Nigerians or mainly Ghanaians or mainly Brazilians. I want to be able to see, look, if you're here, you've got some kind of manic to connect with indigenous folks who live here. And so if I went into one Ghanaian church and they were just singing in the local dialect. And I'm going, guys, the people who live on the streets here from London are never going to come and join you. Because this is, so let's think through how we make connections and how we have access points. And it's about the mindset you have to reach the wider community. And if you're not mission-minded, actually it's mission that's going to help us do this. Yeah. If we're not mission-minded, we're not looking out. We're not, reaching out.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, but there are those, though, who would say, actually, if you look at the root of this divide, much of, if not all of the blame, lies on those who are white, who have been responsible in years gone by for racist attitudes when immigration started to happen into this country. And even in the church, many white majority churches were not welcoming to immigrants coming over.
Yeah,
What
true.
would you say to that?
No, it's true.
Is there an area of repentance that needs to happen here as well? In some ways?
When I was in the West Indian Evangelical Alliance, we called it initially, and then it became the Afro-Caribbean Evangelical Alliance. Or African Caribbean Evangelical Alliance. There were a number of those stories when I went to interview people, and it was good for me to hear these people saying, look, I came over from the Caribbean and this is the welcome I got in some churches. Or pastors at the end of a service would say, how much did you put in the offering? Here's your money back. Please don't come back next week. It's offending people, blah, blah, blah. Really difficult stories. But I think over the years, there have been a number of expressions of apology and a recognition of that. And I'm saying, I don't know if it's still there, if it's still lurking around. It probably is, but we just have to deal with it as we see it. But the next generation who've been brought up here, they have got a better chance to seeing all of that phased out, I think, or at least really dealt with, because the multicultural context of their life is everyday life. I mean, probably the only monocultural setting they ever get into is when they go to some of their churches.
Yeah, sure.
So they've got a better chance of building a church that more represents what I see in heaven. Yeah. And so we're working at that. And of course you're going to come across people, attitudes are as they are, and you're going to find people as they are. But I don't want to judge everybody by the attitude and the posture I find in one person. So I deal with you as an individual. If you come up to me and you've got a problem with black people, I'm going to tell you what I need to tell you. Yeah. But that's not. I'm not going to make sure. I'm not going to say that because you spoke to me that way, the guy behind you or next to you is equal to that. Yeah. You've got to be careful with this stuff.
Well, that brings us to the end of part one of today's show, but do stick around. We're going to be hearing lots more from Doug Williams right after this.
There's a knife crime epidemic in our capital city. In the February edition of Premier Christianity magazine, meet the inspiring Christians bringing God to the gang leaders in the battle for London. Plus, Kay Warren talks about how her marriage to megachurch leader Rick Warren nearly hit rock bottom and what brought them back again. Sam Hales asks whether evangelicalism can survive in the age of Trump. Where's Sutton on what to do when God doesn't heal? And the amazing account of how Corrie ten Boom's unshakable courage saw thousands of Jews rescued in World War II. All that plus much more. Ask for your free copy at premierchristianity.com/free sample.
The Profile. You're listening to Premier Christian Radio.
Welcome back to The Profile here on Premier Christian Radio. I'm Sam Hales with you as we talk to Pastor Doug Williams and hear more about his life, his faith and his ministry. Let's listen in to part two of my interview with Pastor Doug Williams. Well, Doug, I want to move on and chat about music because this is a huge part of your life that we haven't mentioned so far. I know you're a real musician and worship leader, so tell me where all that came from, where the music side of your life first stems from.
You know what? When I was in foster care with my parents, with my first foster parents, the English family, their children used to go to working men's clubs, nightclubs and stuff. And so as a little kid, they'd take me along. But I'd learned to sing. I sang in talent shows and all that kind of stuff. And they would put me in the pub on the table or in the nightclub on the table. I'd sing with the band as a little kid. It was like, they were surprised that this little kid knew these songs. I'd learn them in my bedroom and then sing them, in these clubs. And so I always had that heart and stuff. I learned to play guitar a little bit, which I still enjoy. And so when I got to the church, I started playing guitar and playing for the youth groups and children's groups. And that was where I went, really. I just kept on playing. I got to the Bible school. There was nobody, when I first came to the Bible school in London, the first one in the Oval, there was nobody to play for the worship, for the start of the college. They said, anyone play guitar? And I went, well, I play a bit. So then I ended up playing worship and then teaching worship in that place. And as a result of that, I ended up going to Spring Harvest, and I went down to Greenbelt one year and stood in the paddock and was listening to a band player. They were called Harmonizers, and I'd never heard of this band. They're from London. I thought, man, these guys are good. I turned to a lady next to me and said, these guys are great. She said, yeah, I know some other people in London like that. Where are you from? And I said, London. I didn't even know who this lady was, this black lady standing behind me. But she hooked me up. Her name was Juliet Fletcher. So she hooked me up with a band of guys, and it was a band called Paradise. And, I was with those guys for a good few years, and it was great. We had a single in the charts. We did some churn around. We did the Andre Crouch stuff, and
it was pretty big, right?
It was quite big. It was really an exciting time.
You're being humble about it. I want to draw out some more of the stories, though.
What can I say? It was just great. The guys in the band were very talented musicians. We had a lot of fun. I don't think we were fully understood by some of the churches. I mean, some of the pastors were still pretty conservative in their understanding of what we do. Yes, because
there's been a massive change in the church generally on kind of music. So what kind of time period are we talking about here with
early
the band?
80s? We are.
Early 80s,
yeah. And the sound... people were still nervous to play reggae as Christians, or the soul sound that came from people, R&B bands like Earth, Wind and Fire, and that kind of. We love that kind of stuff. We love the musicianship. We love the dynamic of it, and actually a lot of young people in the church were listening to that stuff, maybe secretly sometimes, but they enjoyed that too. So when they heard a gospel band that was going, wow, they're doing that stuff. And the other thing too was, not only were we playing there, I'm happy to stand up in between the songs and out of my Bible school training and background. Literally, I want to see these young people come to Christ. Yeah. I'm trying to talk seriously. I'm playing music, but I'm feeling like I'm a minister really while I'm on that platform and ministering and talking and sharing. So I guess they got up there and were like, you know what? We got a young guy and young guys who can speak sensibly about their faith and play the kind of music that we like. This is great. And so we had hundreds and hundreds of young people come to these concerts, and it was a very exciting time for us.
Wow. What were some of the bigger events that you played?
We played at Greenbelt. We did some festivals in Holland. We did the whole tour with Andre Crouch. So we were here, the London venues up to Manchester, Birmingham, travelling around. It was just great. Yeah. And then, of course, the band had the single in the charts too. So
fantastic.
Bit of sort of the pop stuff, yeah.
So what brought all that to an end?
Well, the thing was, for me, I came to a place in my own understanding of the band where some of the folks who were around the management and the influence were happy for us to be a gospel band, but kind of be band first. You know what I mean? Like, we're going to present you out as a great soul act who happen to be Christians. And I don't know if that was actually ever fully articulated, but it kind of felt that was there a little bit. It began to get that way, and I thought, I'm not sure that that's what I came in for. I understand that. I mean, there were Christians that I know who are in the industry, and that's fine. You know what I mean? They go into the industry and they're just session musicians or background singers. But we'd come out as a band, as a gospel band. So when you come out and you say, actually, I'm a musical messenger, it's a different thing to saying I'm just a muso amongst many, and my background.
You
is
wanted
Christian.
to emphasise the ministry side of what you were doing.
I think I did, and I thought, I don't want to be any fly in the ointment. If others feel that they probably want to try and pursue this as a career option, I think my career option is going to be involved more in ministry. So it was a really, really tough decision. I mean, my friend in the band, a guy called Bobby Clark, he's like a brother to me. He's a drummer. And when I said to him, "Do you know what, Bobby? I think I'm gonna drop out of the band." They were all really sad because we had some fun on the road, you know. But I felt, no, I'm getting tugged. I'm getting tugged to ministry, and that's where I came in. And the band continued for a little while. I think they did another album. I think I tried 2 more singles, but it never really went, beyond that. So maybe it just had its season. It was done.
Sure. Now, more recently, I know some of your involvement in worship music. You've worked quite closely with the Renewal event and Kingdom Worship Movement. Do you want to? I mean, I've been to that event before, amazing event, but I'd love to hear from you more of the heart behind that and your involvement in it.
Well, the heart behind it is actually the heart of a guy called Noel Robinson. And people see it now. I mean, we'll probably be at...
it's happening soon, isn't it?
Yeah, it will be in February. We'll be there at Ilford City Gates at the beginning of February, 2nd and 3rd. But the issue is, Noel has this heart of seeing what can happen when people blend together and when worship is across denominations and cultures, because he worked for many years with Graham Kendrick and saw events in stadiums and stuff and thought, wow, Noel could have been in his own right a great session guitar player and traveled with bands and made significant money if he wanted to. He's a very talented guy. But he saw that and got a glimpse of that, and I think somehow God put that in his heart. And so now we're seeing, hundreds and hundreds of people over the time that's been going, thousands of people that have come through that event. But I think people ought to know that long before Noel was on that platform with any albums with integrity or any spotlight on his head, in his local church, he was doing the same thing. I remember going to meetings in his local church, which was like a sort of micro renewal event. So he was doing that when no one was looking, which is the integrity of the man for me. And so that's why I thought I'd get involved. And he said to me, look, I see you as having a significant role in terms of communication and sharing the gospel. Would you be prepared to come and be a part of this and maybe come and do some teaching for us? So I whenever they need me, whatever city they're in, if I can be available and my schedule allows, I'll show up and do some teaching and help bolster that. And it's been great to help people get a fresh expression of worship, to get outside of their church confines and settings and discover what it is. Yeah.
I guess part of the thinking is that although we talked already about some of the sort of divides that can exist in the church, you go to one church and it's all people looking one way, go to church and they all are of a different ethnicity. I guess the heart behind the renewal is to try and bring this together. But it's interesting, I think Noel has remarked in the past that both groups are often singing the same songs, actually. And is there a way that music can actually bring us together? There's a kind of common language.
It is. It's definitely, wherever you are, there is that common language right across our experiences, whether you're in church or outside of church. It just seems that music has a way of doing that and getting into the human heart and mind in an incredible way. So, and that's what's happened at the renewal. I've seen that definitely, people, blending together, finding themselves in a context which maybe they wouldn't have done otherwise. They wouldn't have walked into one another's churches like that, but into this event, a bit neutral, a bit different. They've discovered things that they like, And so Noel's been very good. There's a real lovely palette of flavors on the platform in terms of expression and style, and we're making sure that people can find something that represents them and they feel comfortable with. But you've also got a chance to try something else. It's almost like you invite people around to a meal. You kind of think, well, what will people eat? And you ask, what's any menu items that people don't eat or would like. But then you put some other little dishes around the side that they can just experiment with. It's not the whole meal, but you can get a little flavour and see if you like it. Maybe beyond our meeting tonight, you can go and enjoy yourself later on. It's kind of like that with the music. We give them a little flavour of different things, but maybe they wouldn't have been exposed to in their own circles, and so it kind of broadens your experience.
Right. Well, that is the renewal event. It's coming up in February. If you want to find out more information, look up Kingdom Worship Movement, the renewal, and you'll be able to get tickets and go along to that. But Doug, you were talking a moment before about the band that you were doing and how that was reaching a lot of young people. I'd love to talk today in your own ministry, what you're doing through your church, through your ministry to reach out to young people, because many have commented that the church in general is kind of going in the wrong direction with age groups. We've got an aging church and not enough young people coming through, many people would argue. So firstly, do you agree with that? And secondly, if you do, what is your way of trying to counteract that and change that in the church?
No, I do agree with that. I think young people are finding a struggle to relate to a lot of things that happen in the church simply because of relevance issues, and they want to know, does all this stuff work when I leave the building? And the style and the flavour of it all, has it got, is it contemporary enough, and does it relate to what I understand is happening in the rest of my life? So I think churches have got to recognise that that's a reality, that's happening, and they have to make some steps towards it. In our own church, I think we've been intentional at least trying. I'm not saying that we've done it brilliantly, but the intentionality is evidenced by the fact that we have a youth pastor. Right. Michael Dewar is the guy in our church. We're putting money into his life and family in order to release him to serve our young people. We have another pastor who works primarily with children, Pastor Chris Palmer. And so we've got two guys who have made their commitment to go to schools and into youth groups and connect with the families. And we have a youth conference and a children's conferences and events to try and make sure that these young people have a context of kind of Christianity that they appreciate and feel is relevant for them. And it is working. We have our halls packed every Friday night with young people coming to serve, and our ministry with children is having significant impact. And beyond that, I got to say props to a couple in our church by the name of Titileo and Akin Oluwatidimu. They came to me one day with a vision to set up a school, and said, this is how the church could get behind this. And so we have. Wow. And we now have a free school, a primary school, proper primary school in our area, which is another great way. There's kids there that aren't Christians, and we love working with those families. And that's another way of trying to reach kids. And some of them have come over into our actually youth ministry and children's ministries. And of course, the government seen what we've done and appreciated it. And we've got permission now to progress to another school. So all of this is quite exciting, and it's around the youth and children stuff.
Yeah. So how many people are in that? So is it the one or the one free school you got at the moment?
It's one free school at the moment, and we're up to year 5 with 30 in a class and a reception group. So it's going to be a good couple of 100 kids in there, a few hundred kids when we're finished, and then the next one, and who knows where it goes from there. Just keep going until we can do no more.
I think people would be amazed to hear that a church even could set up a school. That's quite an amazing idea for some people. So this is
maybe it's only amazing because they don't read church history. I mean, Sunday schools were schools. They were to teach children about numeracy and literacy to give them a better opportunity for economic progress. It wasn't just about Christian catechism and how to teach them the Bible. I think the reason why Bible teaching came in was because we didn't want to raise intelligent criminals. and so the people who started Sunday schools were saying, we need a moral compass, a moral center to what they do. And that's where our teaching of the things of Christ came in. So church is getting involved with schools and making that kind of impact on society. That's regaining territory we had before. It's not really that new. We're just trying to catch up with our history.
There's been an amazing resurgence almost for a lot of churches in recent years on whether it be free schools or running a food bank or doing street pastoring. It seems that we're arguably reaching a bit of a tipping point where some of the wider culture, wider society does recognise Christians, perhaps even evangelical Christians, as having a positive influence and not just being known for what we're against, but trying to do things in the community. Yeah. How significant is that? Is there?
No, it is. I mean, because the shadow of the steeple has diminished, and the church's influence, because there's been enough confusions and tensions and divisions and disappointments in church life. We've talked about the reality of people's weaknesses and vulnerabilities. They've been on show, and not only to the church, to the watching world. And so they've gone, I'm not sure Christianity's credibility is taking a bit of a hit. And so, like Floyd McClung, who worked with Youth of the Mission many, many years ago and working in the red light district in Holland, he said in one of his writings, I read it from him, I don't know whether it's his quote, but I read it in his writings, where he said, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think that's where we're now at, that people have got to be convinced that we care, that we're genuine, that we're in it for people. We're not just trying to get a religious scalp under our belts. And so I think, the church has got to get out there and got to be salt and light and got to touch lives and touch hearts, and then we'll earn the right to be heard again.
Mm. But can that only go so far? I mean, I'm reminded very recently of Tim Farron, the well-known politician who throughout 2016 was quizzed time and time again his views on homosexuality, and many Christians would argue he simply gave an orthodox Christian answer to that most recently when he was asked on the topic, and he was hounded by
well, he didn't
the
give an
media.
orthodox. I've got to cut you there because he didn't. He actually said he thought that kind of expression of sexuality was fine. He didn't say that.
He did to the BBC.
Yeah,
and then he changed. And then
I think he came into Premier Radio. I think he came into Premier Radio and said,
And he said, actually, I was wrong to give that answer to the BBC. So he's effectively, some have argued, he's effectively admitted lying, which of course Christians would say is a sin as much as anything else. But even so, when he was trying to articulate a traditional Christian view, and at least initially, and most recently on the issue of sexuality, many Christians said he was hounded. There's almost a kind of idea that can a Christian with that view be in public life? Yeah,
exactly, and that's going to increasingly be the case because our world and even the church at the moment hasn't got a clear idea of a theology of fallenness. Look, in a fallen world, there's lots of things that people would say that feels real to me, but being real and being right are two different things. Now, you have to hold that in terms of theological conviction and be courageous enough to say that that's my conviction. I'm not imposing it on you. If you have a particular conviction about orientation, sexual orientation or lifestyle, you're free to make whatever choices you want to make. I can't control your choices. I would advise you that every choice has a consequence, and I just hope the consequences for your choice are what you really want, but that's on you. The issue for me is what you can't control about me is my conviction. So if I have a conviction that that's not normative for me, or that behavior isn't something I would consider to be what I want to encourage others to do, that's my conviction. Why should I have the law imposed against me because I hold that conviction? So I think it's going to take a lot of courage to stand up in the public place and say, this is my view, I'm a Christian, this is what I stand by. I don't think we should be hounded for it, but we probably will be soon. Because if you say this sort of things now and it's all, in law, you're not going to go down because of your beliefs, you're going to go down as a lawbreaker. But let's just be courageous enough to tell the truth.
So it's interesting that Christians can do all the good stuff they want in the community, and they'll be welcomed with the food banks and welcome for the free schools. But when we articulate a Christian view on sexual ethics, you're saying we are going to be unpopular, and that's where we need the courage.
Yeah, definitely. It's already proven. I'm not saying something that's going to may happen. It's already out there, and I just think we just tell people we're not homophobic or anything like that. I'm not frightened of anybody, whatever orientation you have. We just have a conviction based on our revelation. And I don't have the right to change that. Now, you can agree with it, you can disagree with it, but I don't have the right to change it. And actually, neither do you.
Are you optimistic about the future of the church in the UK?
Oh, absolutely. I do. I think we've got a great opportunity to do something fantastic for God. And because, we're kind of having to reinvent our ideas about who we are and our brand everywhere. There's going to be some very creative ways, some very creative expressions of how the church connects with the community and does its outreach. I'm looking forward to seeing how that happens.
So, Doug, tell me, what's been the best day and the worst day of your ministry as a pastor?
The best day and the worst day of my ministry? The best day and the worst day. I think the best days are when I see people getting it. When I see people getting Christianity and saying, Jesus has changed this in my life, especially in family situations. And I think because of my own background when family life is broken, when I see family life healed and Christ is at the center of that, I find that incredibly rewarding.
Yeah.
The saddest thing for me, I had a season several years ago where a number of people in our church died. And it just seemed like every announcement was somebody's death. I mean, people left our church. They were like, we're under a curse. This is so dark. It was horrible. It was horrible for me. And I remember feeling so powerless and confused. I'm like, God, what's happening here? I went to a dear friend of mine, whose family member died, and this was probably the last straw. And I came home late in the night, early morning, thinking, I can't put my arms around this. I can't fix this. And I was walking up the gateway into my house, and I think that was the darkest moment. I was walking slowly to the door, and you know what? I heard a bird singing. The only time I've ever heard a bird singing in the middle of the night, man. I'm thinking, what on earth is going on here? I just stopped. I thought, what's going on? What is that? So I went back to the pathway where I'd parked my car, and in the tree just behind my car, where the light was, there was a bird sitting on this branch over my car, singing its lungs out. I'm like, what in the world is that? How odd. And so when I get back to my home now, I'm ready to go through the front door, the thoughts that settled on my heart was, I need to learn to do that. I need to learn to sing in the night, because it's not always easy. That was one of the darkest moments of my ministry. It's just the feeling of how do you handle stuff when you think, I can't fix it, I can't speak to this, I can't preach to this, I can't throw money at this. That's one of the challenges. And yeah, ministry has its limitations. You can't do everything as a human being. You do what you can, and that's the rough lesson that had to be learned. But so those two things, when I see families get healed, and the darkest moment is looking at stuff that you think, I just wish I could fix this, and I can't.
Well, what do you think are the misconceptions that Christians have of their pastors? Well, what's the sort of the one or two things you'd say to people who are Christians who may have sort of assumptions about what you do day to day, or what your responsibility is, or even perhaps what you've just said about you can't fix everything?
Yeah, I mean, that would probably be what I would say to them. I can't fix everything, because they think that you can. You make a call and you're always got to be on tap for them. If that's what we pay you for. You've got to be here to do this. And you go, well, hold it. I do have a life. I want to take care of my family. I want to take care of my kids. I don't want to lose my family while I'm trying to take care of yours. Yeah. Those are the kind of things. The pressure on you sometimes to juggle a number of different things. I mean, it's easy for some people to switch the light off in their office at 5 o'clock and go, I'm done for the day. But I don't know how to do that emotionally very well sometimes, because I'm thinking of people's lives long after I've left the office, and the concerns for their children, their finances, their well-being. So some of the pressures are quite intense, and I think people need to know when I've got a break and when I'm away, hey, give me space to recoup, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. I guess it's difficult to in many jobs increasingly to draw the distinction of home life and work life. I think even technology has done that, hasn't it? We have our emails at home and on our mobile phones.
It's terrible.
When are we actually out of the office?
Have a good wife like mine. Have a wife like mine who says, "Hey, it's time to quit. Turn it off." And I wish I could tell you that I always listen to her, but she'll tell you, if I said that on the radio, she'd email in and say he's lying. So no, truth to say, Joan is a queen of a woman. I have an exceptional wife, and she's been really helpful for me. She's like, Doug, you need to be careful. You know what I'm saying? You've got your own children to take care of. You've got your health to take care of, and we need time. When you weren't in ministry all the time, you weren't, there was not a big church and large responsibilities around you. We had time for each other. Yeah. Well, let's not lose that. Because when all this goes, it'll still be me and you.
Doug, it's been wonderful to chat. Before we go, we should just briefly mention your involvement with Premier goes back a long time. Certainly far longer than I've been here.
Yeah,
so
sure.
Why don't you share a couple of your memories?
I remember I mentioned the pastor that I joined at Emmanuel called Andrew Coulthard. And Andrew and I had a program on Premier Radio, I think it was about 3 years, called Heart to Heart. And we were here. I'd be here recording and doing stuff. And I think David Aldous was working with us then. Peter Kerridge would come to our church. John Pantry and the team. Crystal was here then as well. They'd all come to our church. And I think our church was one of the first church groups that came down to get a sort of tour of Premier Studio and offices.
Yeah.
So,
Before we were even in this current building.
Before you were in this current building, we were at the other side of Victoria. So... yeah, it was good. I remember it. It was great days. I enjoyed it. I remember Peter Kerridge used to say, I'm driving around on Saturday evening and I try and tune in and listen to your program. I felt honoured,
Amazing. Well, Doug, it's great to have you back in again here at Premier. Thank you so much for sharing so much of your life testimony and faith with us today.
Thank you.
Well, that's sadly all we got time for today on the show. Thanks so much for joining us as I sat down with Pastor Doug Williams. Do hope you enjoyed that. And if you'd like to hear more interviews with leading Christians from all walks of life, not just pastors, not just people working Christian ministry, but from across the length and breadth of the UK church and beyond, you can access past shows, past interviews we've done with leading Christians. Just go to premierchristianradio.com/the profile. And the other thing you can do while you're there, as well as checking out past episodes, is get this show as a podcast. More and more people are finding us where people find podcasts on iTunes and elsewhere, which is wonderful. Tens of thousands now downloading the show and listening in to the interviews we're doing. So please do join us on that format. If you like podcasts, then we would love to have you join us. That's premierchristianradio.com/the profile. And finally, a little bit of personal news from myself to share with you. As of this past week, I have been made editor of Premier Christianity magazine. That's the magazine that sponsors this show, that sponsors the profile. So I'm really delighted to say that I'm going to be taking the magazine forwards. You probably have heard on this show before, and indeed on Premier before, the voice of Justin Briley, who hosts the unbelievable programme where Christians and atheists come together for debate and discussion. A fantastic programme that's really going from strength to strength. And so Justin has actually stepped down from leading Premier Christianity magazine. He's done an amazing job over the past 4 years editing the magazine. He's handed that over to me, and he's now focusing on unbelievable full-time. But you'll still be able to hear his voice, and indeed my voice, on this show, on the profile, as we sit down with leading Christians. Nothing is going to change in terms of the profile. You'll still hear me and Justin, and indeed many others from here at Premier HQ, interviewing a wide range of Christians. But Premier Christianity magazine is, of course, the magazine that sponsors this show and will continue to do so. We're going to be providing you with some fantastic interviews in print as well as on air on this show. So if you would like to read our latest interview, a fantastic interview by Claire Musters with Kay Warren, that is the wife of Pastor Rick Warren, a really, really honest discussion between Kay and Claire, I do encourage you to check out premierchristianity.com/free sample. Just type your details in and we'll send you a free copy of the latest issue of the magazine with that interview in. That's premierchristianity.com/free sample, the magazine that sponsors this show, and indeed the UK's leading Christian magazine. It's been around for over 50 years, and so it's a real pleasure and honour from my perspective now to be editing that title. Why not subscribe if you haven't already, or indeed get that free sample copy so you can join the journey with us as we go forward together as a magazine. But I just wanted to let you know that little bit of news. Time now, though, to hand over here on Premier Christian Radio to Dave Rose. He's coming up next with Premier Playback.